Hello to everybody that is tuning in tonight for tonight's episode of the Coach's Corner. As our guests get settled in, I'm just going to say a few words before we get started. By all means, ask questions, post them in the comment box. I will be keeping an eye on that and passing along any questions that come up. Please feel free to do so. They're here to answer questions. It's awesome. It's great. It's wonderful. Feel free. Try to keep them on topic if at all possible. And if we don't get to your questions tonight, it is not personal, but they are happy to touch base with you in the future. I know I'm speaking on behalf of you, Duke Brannos, aren't I?
I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Yes, yes.
Somebody's going to talk to me? That'd be great.
Yes. So our guests are going to be turning on their videos here in a moment, and I am going to pass this off to Duke Brannos for now to get us started and introduce tonight's episode.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's another Friday night, and the great part here is we have Alan on back. His Grace was here last time talking about essentially how to break down a fight and how to essentially find the blows that you should be throwing based on the decisions that you make watching your opponent. So this is actually the decision-making process with Duke Ailgheanan, but we fooled everybody and said that this was the, developing a training process. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of double up at the end and make him answer both. But we're going to start because we had a great conversation going on the decision-making process last time. So we want to continue that because personally, I wasn't done with it because I just enjoy listening to Ailgheanan. And I wanted to give him a chance to kind of finish up. We're going to throw some questions out to him. I hope you guys throw a lot of questions out to him. He's an incredible resource. We've been lucky enough here to have a lot of great resources, but I'm a little biased only because he's a very good friend and I miss him a lot. And so I could pretty much have him back at once a month and I'd be pretty happy. So Tristan, why don't you go ahead and talk about the decision-making process and kind of the things that we're talking about.
Sure. It's been a while since we did our episode. We've done so many episodes since Ailgheanan was on. And I remember watching it, although I wasn't on that episode. But I mean, Ailgheanan and I have fought a number of times, even though we've lived on the other end of the country from one another. We've had the chance, he's been in my backyard and trained fighters, trained me. We've shared ideas. Ailgheanan's definitely got a very fascinating perspective on his process. And I remember him going over, I think you were showing us when you were up here the last time, and we did the practice in my backyard way back in the day. You were showing us that reverse, I think you called it a reverse lefty wrap or something like that. And it was one of those, it was crazy angle, but it's one of those things where I was thinking about it as you showed that, like, how do you go about determining that's the one you need? Like, what are you looking for? And I guess this kind of feathers into the subject that you guys were talking about, which is people often, I guess, try to figure out how do I add more shots to my library as opposed to figuring out what do I need to see from my opponent to throw the one or two shots that I do really well, instead of just adding to the repertoire. You know what I mean? This is a trap that I got caught in as a mid-level fighter, thinking, wow, I just need to have this huge repertoire. And I was ignoring what I was seeing from my opponent. And so I think that reading an opponent may be where we can start this section of the conversation. Would that seem like a good start?
Yeah. Can you guys still hear it?
Mm-hmm. First of all, thank you, Tristan. Thank you, Brannos, and thank you, Vesper, for having me on the show tonight. It's an honor to get a chance to be a part of the Society for Creative Anachronism in these trying times. And I really appreciate all the work that you guys have done to keep the SCA and keep SCA combat in the minds of fighters and non-fighters alike. So thanks for that. But to answer Tristan's question, I mean, and this does follow up on what we talked about before. I just don't throw any shot, until I've processed or gathered information and then processed that into a kind of a game plan. So I know if I can throw an offhanded thumb lead shot based off of the probing done long before I throw that shot. So, you know, if you just go into things like that, especially a shot that has, you know, some moving parts to it, and you just try to throw it, you know, the information that you could have gotten from the probe could be they're not going to fall for that, and they just have a tendency to throw a shot whenever they see something they don't know, which is the death of you. So, you know, kill shots like that, you set up by learning from your opponent, listening to what they're trying to tell you, and then being able to process it. And then you also have to learn how to process it at the speed that it needs to be thrown, if that makes sense. You know, it's not everything gets thrown at the same speed. So, you know, you should find that information out before you try it.
Mm-hmm. I find that there's kind of two aspects, almost like a yin and yang approach. There's the talking, which is when you enter a fight, maybe it's against somebody who's a little bit more passive or timid, and you start to force them into a corner. Not so much physically into a corner, but you start to move and make them react to you. And then you start to control their reactions by you asserting yourself. And then there's the opposite side, which is the listening part, where you are waiting to see them and how they decide to do their initial movement, kind of like a chess player waiting for the white pawn, you know, white to move his initial piece and then respond to that. And so it seems to me like with the decision-making process, the first thing is to go in and your initial assessment that maybe this happened before the marshal calls lay on, or right as he does it, and you say, all right, am I going to speak first or am I going to listen first? Or it's probably some combination there. Or am I going to go assert pressure, or am I going to you know, move up and then just see how they initiate? Do they come barreling at me, or do I start to maneuver into applying my pressure?
Right.
What do you think of that idea of those two different, the speaking and the listening part?
Yeah, I guess you could essentially say them that way. I think that the big piece is to be able to make those evaluations, right, really quick, and that's what makes a good fighter. Is not only is he making the one evaluation, and this happens way too much. Really, top end fighters, they go in, they already naturally, a lot of times they'll make the first move just to see what their opponent does. Does he snap into guard and ready to go? Is he slow to go into guard? Does he move? Does he come forward, or does he go backwards? You know, all of those things you learn from, right? I mean, you know, and the big piece there is not only do you learn from those, but you're going to learn every time you do something, and all of that gets categorized in your head. And you gotta manage all of those things. It's like playing a game of chess. Even when you're ready and like, I know this is the best chance I have. I set it up. I'm going to throw this shot, and the guy blocks it. Right. And the next thing you know, the next piece is, why did he block that, and what did he leave open? Right? Did I do it wrong? Did I not set it up well enough? Do I still think I could get that shot? But not only that, what did he block that with? And what did he leave open? Because next time, if he lets something else that's larger open, I'm still going to push that top corner, go back. Now, I'm not going to do it the next pass. I might do it 3, 4, 5, 6 passes later, because they know, right? They're like, oh, made a mistake. You want them to go back to their natural state, right, where they're not thinking and they're just reacting normally, and then you go back to that. But meanwhile, in those 3, 4, 5, 6 passes, you're not just standing around going, oh, okay, I'm going to wait for that one. No, you're still testing, and you already had set up 2, 3 other shots that you wanted to try. So you're just categorizing, and it's this constant categorizing of these shots. And this is where the hard part, and Alan and you can speak to this a little bit, but they talk all the time. It's like empty mind, and then people think that empty mind means, the idea of probing and figuring out what's going to happen is done without thought. And it's like, that is not. It's the execution of technique, right?
I think it's open mind. It's not empty mind.
Yeah.
It's I am open to the stimuli that is coming my direction, and I'm going to try to. It's my job now to process it correctly.
Mhm.
It's not empty. It's just you're not thinking about other aspects of the fight that could be distractions. You are thinking about the fights that's not, thinking about what you're going to do at certain ranges. That's not a distraction. Starting to think about what you're going to wear if you win Crown List is a distraction. Or getting bored, or wondering, starting to think about anything other than the fight in front of you are the distractions. But if you are open-minded and ready to process, that's what I think empty mind means.
Yeah. See, for me, I always, when I talk to people, that empty mind to me is when you execute technique. When you're ready to execute, you should have no thought. That should, thousands of hours of throwing that shot should allow you not to even say, okay, I
Yeah,
got to
I
break.
get that.
I got to break my fingers this way. I gotta cast this out this way. My elbow has to be here. All of that's gone, right? But the fight itself, that chess match is Musashi's war, right? He's laying every piece of that out. And I think there's a misconception out there a lot of times, because I mean, I think they like, oh, these guys are great, so they don't even have to think about what they're doing. And man, is that the way you operate? Because it sure isn't the way I operate.
No, and people also mistake our extremely proficient and deadly probes into thinking that we weren't actually planning and working and probing and processing. We were doing all of that. But if I'm safely throwing certain kill shots that I think I can do, I'm throwing them as probes. I'll take the victory though. And people all the time, they're like, I try to tell them, well, I'm a defensive fighter and I'm trying to understand things. I'm using offense to help me process that information. They're like, no, you just went out there and hit that guy. And I'm like, no, I was probing. He didn't block it. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think a lot of times, it's amazing. Sometimes, you're in the middle of a fight and it's a longer fight because the other guy is doing the same thing, because their level is at that level. You make your first probe and you're like, this guy is moving right, or you move right or left and he tracks you. You're like, oh, okay, so this is going to be a little harder, right? We already figured out speed, because we're out there, we can kind of get a feel of his speed of his feet and get a feel of the speed of his sword in safe manners. But now, you're like, okay, so we're one layer up. So now you make those probing exercises really small, and sometimes people don't see it. I mean, I've been in battles where, in heroics where we're out there for a very long time sometimes, and I feel bad, for the spectators. And it's so, you come back, you're setting everything up for that couple of shots. Every pass is a good probe, and what you thought was going to kill the guy. And so, but you come back after 20 minutes and you're in the middle of the battle. I'm thinking, I probably should do something so people get some excitement. But it's a heroic, right? I mean, you're there to win as well, and some people want to see that, but when you talk to the layman, they don't see those probes because they're really small, and sometimes even good fighters don't see it because it could just be as small as a twitch that your opponent's going to pick up, right? But it's amazing because you'll walk off the field and there, other Dukes will be like, man, that was the best fight I ever saw, and there was 10 blows thrown, Yeah. And so it doesn't take the blows to be a fight, right? I think too many people, and you covered this last time, Ailgheanan, and that was, I think they think there's a shot clock, right? And the blows make the fight great. And
I get it. The action is fun. So I understand. And a lot of people came into our sport, myself included, because it was enjoyable. It was fun. But it wasn't until I started treating it more like a martial art than just some activity that was fun, that, you're willing to now take the time required to understand and learn from each fight, as opposed to just have fun. But I heard you say one time, well, winning is fun, but the long answer is the process to consistent winning can also be fun. It's more work.
Yeah, and you have to appreciate the dedication put into that process, right? Your constant practice, you're not falling into the holes where you get beat, and you're just building that perfect game. It's not necessarily exciting, right? Because they're taking these big waves out. Because along with like, hey, I just killed Duke Muckety Muck, then you lose to some guy that just came in 2 months ago, right? And that consistency, you get a really good consistency, and all of a sudden you take some excitement out of it, right? You have great basketball players, and they'll put 30, 40, 50 points on the board every night. Are they incredibly fun to watch? Are they jamming the ball every time? No, right?
They're very good. They're good examples of that in NBA right now. James Harden is not particularly fun to watch, but he's scoring 50 points a night. It's just he's forcing people to foul him, and now he's shooting free throws, and a free throw is a high percentage shot. And you know what? It's freaking brilliant. And if you really just love all the, even the analytic part of the game, it's brilliant and it's good. I will admit, it's boring. It's I want to go to sleep during free throws, but he's taking advantage of the system, and the system is if he gets fouled, it's a 90% shot now for him. So why on earth would he not want to take advantage of that system? And that's what we do as fighters. As thoughtful fighters, we're trying to take advantage of, in a way, the analytics of our sport, which is I want to do things that are high reward, low risk. So I'm going to learn as much as I can about each individual fight that I'm in to get to the point that I am doing something high reward, low risk. Because if you're doing something that's high reward, high risk, you might as well be throwing dice, and whoever rolled the highest dice wins that fight.
Exactly.
And it's fun. They can be exciting. I've watched fights like that, and I'm like, that was fun. It was beautiful to watch. I learned nothing from that fight, though, and I don't think the person who won that fight could teach me anything.
Yep. I would agree 100%. So I think again, this is supposed to be in depth, but I think some people would probably still want to hear. Let's say your Leon is called. What's your first probe normally?
So I start at least trying to gather information before Leon. I take the process of, especially in a tournament where there is the ritual of introducing each combatant, but I take that opportunity to do a quick inventory of what kind of weapons are they using, what kind of shield are they using, So I think the probing, at least the mental probing, starts immediately. And if it's anything other than the first round, and it's a big tournament where you were fighting at the same time as your opponent was last round, you should have been probing in the broadest sense of the term, watching everyone you can in their fights in the initial rounds. So if we're deep into a tournament, I have seen you at least once already. And I was paying attention. I might be gabbing with a friend, but my eyes are on the field, and I've started the process of even beginning to, how am I going to probe this guy? What am I going to open up with? So you said on Leon. So we get to Leon. I've already double checked, and it sounds really dumb, but over the course of our history, every one of us have made a mistake of, oh, that dude was left-handed.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no reason for that to happen when they throw at you. You should know that before, unless they're two weapons or a pole arm or something. You should know that going into the fight. So, but then everything I do from that point on, I start to move towards them to close distance. I want it. That's a probe in itself. I want it. That allows me to start processing. How do they react to that? Do they come forward quickly? That's telling me, how aggressive they want to be, or are they tentative about that, or are they giving ground altogether? So you're using your footwork at the very beginning of the fight, and that's completely low risk, should be. You're not in range. So, you start that process there. But by the time we start to get in range, I might start doing movement with my shoulders, movement with my shoulders, simulates the action that you can actually do with your sword and your shield. I'm not quite in range yet. I'm actually getting to the step where we're about to be in range. But little movements like that are probes as well. So those are the initial safest probes you can possibly do, that give you valuable information back. But if I can start to see flinches and the directions that people flinch based off of what, kind of what my shoulders are doing, just at the furthest range of threat, that's information that hopefully people are looking at and then taking advantage of. So before I've ever thrown a shot, those are my initial probes. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm looking for. I think, that goes a long way into talking about, just some of the simplest things I tell people is beginning of a fight. Instead of walking straight into somebody's strength, right? Walk into their corners, walk into their 45. See if the person turns or they slide. If they track you, a guy has some good connectivity. Mm-hmm. If they turn, you have opportunity.
Yeah.
So, because you can take advantage of them being a half a beat behind on a turn. Mm-hmm. And you carry that in a fight. It's like, okay, I got a guy that's going to turn most of the time. I don't have to worry about him constantly tracking me. So I can use quicker movements now to possibly put him in a bad rotational piece. Push one way, go the other way. Where when a person tracks you, you have a scenario where he's going to track you one way and shift the other way. And they are close enough in time that they could actually, as long as they know how to do this, they could throw, and they're prepared to throw and block because they're still in front of you.
Yeah.
So,
yep. It's all good.
That's
yeah.
Small. Yeah. It's all that, it's that small, right? I mean, there's the beginning of a fight.
Yeah. That's all useful information if you're willing to process it and take then the next steps of what it's given you. It's noise if you're not processing it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Tristan, when we take a look at that, even I used to do some martial arts tournaments, but realistically, let's take Aikido for an example for that, right? Mm-hmm. You have to do that. You're in the midst of, okay, can I make that guy pull or push? Right. And how am I going to take advantage of that? And now we're not talking range, although there is an engagement of range that happens first. Mm-hmm. But even in the bind, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the learning, my interpretation of SCA, the things I learned about SCA combat, one of the big takeaways was the moving of the feet. One of the things that I would like to probe when I started with an opponent was, if I move my feet, do they respond by moving their feet, or do they respond by moving their hands or their body? If they move the hands and the body, like they turn and track, but they don't move the feet, I know I'm going to outmaneuver them. Like, I'm just going to make sure that they're always playing catch up with where their feet position is. And that translates to Aikido and all fighting that I've studied, whether it's street fights, sport fights of hand to hand, or sport fights with weapons. It's the one who fails his footwork that's going to be at the short end of the stick. And this is where I guess we could possibly cross into the developing a training plan, like how do you build a fighter from the beginning? And that is, make sure that their feet are doing their role, playing their proper role in that fight, because the feet control range, the feet do the shift, they control where you are in relation to your opponent, not just direct range, but also those angles, the 45s you're talking about. And I've also noticed, even from highly disciplined fighters, the feet is one of the first things that gets forgotten or overlooked when things get really hectic and busy. And, we can see our hands in front of our face and we remember that they're there, but the feet we don't. And all it takes is one missed step or one missed shift or what have you to let you get yourself into a bad position. And when you turn it around, all you need your opponent to do is miss that one step or miss a shift or miss a control range, and then you're in a superior position. And that's where it transposes to Aikido so well, because we want to put our body in an advantage position immediately, every single time. And that's usually moving to a flank or to behind if you can do it. But it all comes out of that footwork component. And so to me, when I would probe, that's one of the things I'd watch for, is what am I seeing on an opponent's feet? Especially if you start that movement like Ailgheanan was doing, those shifts, and you see them rock onto their heels. If you've got an eye that you can see balance that well, and you can see those toes just lift up a little bit as they shift onto their heels, you know that they're immobile for just about a half second. And that can lead you into, all right, I'm going to paint you into a corner so that you cannot move, and then I'm going to shift, and it's done. So I was a big footwork guy, and it kind of turned into one, I guess, from when I decided to go from fun fighting, which I loved, by the way. I pretty much came in the way Ailgheanan did. I love mixing it up. I love getting into B range and just absolutely swapping shots, and I would literally start giggling in the middle of the whole thing. But then I realized after a couple of years of that, it was high risk. A lot of times I would lose. I'd still be laughing like a child because it was a blast, but it wasn't fighting smart. But when I learned more about fighting smart, it came down to footwork and placement. That was really it.
Hey, Trist, who's the Duke from Onsteora who was a professional karate fighter?
That would be Inman, Duke Inman.
Do you remember the guy I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
So my first Penzik, my first practice, my first going up to the field and doing pickups at Penzik, very fortunate to have fought the king of Onsteora. I didn't know he was the king, and I did real well. So he had just asked, he's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "This is great. This is my first time at Penzik, first fight at Penzik." And he's like, "Cool." And then we fought, and I got a good shot in on him, and he was like, "No, the first person you ever killed at your very first Penzik was the king of Onsteora." And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I'm on my way. And to make sure that I didn't get far up too, and he did something that was an entirely footwork thing that just messed my mind. I really felt like I was faster than him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was, and I think he went so far. He goes, "No, you're really fast, and you move backwards really fast, but you took your front foot and moved it backwards to start your whole thing going back. And I took my front foot and moved forwards to start the whole thing, and you never far enough away from me." And that just kind of blew my mind. It seems so simple now, but I mean, that was just a very quick mind experience that you don't have to move faster, better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I lived in Dallas for a while, and I actually attended a number of Inman's practices back when he was still doing them. And yeah, he was a total footwork guy, and big. He had a forearm like a barrel. I mean, he was an armor and just super strong. But boy, you watched him, and he was all over the place with his feet. It was really breathtaking to watch. And that was an early lesson. That was even before I was squired. So that was a really good lesson for how a big guy, because he's tall, like you wouldn't think that somebody that big would be that mobile, but boy, howdy, he was all over the place. And I remember one of my first Penziks, and I don't know if this was maybe yours too. I think this was 17 when I saw him, and he was in a champions fight. And I remember this distinctly because he always reminded me of what King Arthur, like the old King Arthur would look like, big long beard and the kind of the glowering face, and you look at him and he's got the scary look in the whole thing. And
the
champions fight comes up, and he's sitting in a chair at the edge of the field, and they call his name, and he kind of like he creaks out of the chair, barely able to get to his feet, and then they call Leon, and this guy is all over the field, like his footwork. He's just got. I think it was a bluff. I think he was doing it just to kind of put people on, but boy,
no, he used to walk with a cane all the time.
Yeah, that's what I say. I remembered him having a cane before he fought, put his helmet on and fought me, and I'm like, all right, old man, here it comes. And I was right. Here it comes.
So now you're saying you're the old man?
Well, that is kind of the cyclical nature of things. If you can stick in it long enough,
So I guess we're talking.
There it is.
Student's the master now.
Yeah. So we're talking about the idea of movement, and to switch switch gears really quick back to training. So what kind of things do you start out people with to help their movement or to make sure that their mindset is geared at understanding that movement is important?
So I could be wrong, but I think that people don't understand movement well. And I don't think people understand. I don't think it's one of those natural things that people understand. Especially if you came into to what we're doing without a foundation in some other sport or some other real martial art. I think that, you didn't learn them as kids. So you didn't learn footwork and balance as a kid. A lot of people in the SCA come into it without that background. And so I'm hesitant to try to teach a lot of fundamental footwork early, but I try to take away the bad things, and I'll just be straight up. It's like, that particular movement is exposing you, so don't do it. And rather than say, here's how you do it, because I don't think a lot of times people are ready yet for that. I'm just trying to take away the excess and the things that they're not doing well. And it typically leaves them with the things that they're doing right. And then you can build on that. However, you can improve the good footwork you're doing now with these kinds of techniques and an understanding of why you're doing it when you're doing it. I see people who have naturally good footwork, but naturally good footwork doesn't help you if you're not applying it in the correct situation. That just means you've got good balance and a pretty good neutral stance. But if you're not taking advantage of what someone else is doing to you, or if you're not able to compensate for what someone is bringing at you with your footwork, then you're just naturally good at footwork, but you're not really using it to a great advantage. So my answer is, I don't feel like I've come up with very good techniques to teach footwork. So I just try to eliminate the bad footwork, the obvious mistakes that people are doing with it, until we have a foundation of just the things that we're doing right are the right things.
What do you find are the most common mistakes that you've seen?
Goofy foot for the wrong reason. Goofy foot should be done on purpose with a very clear understanding of what it gives you and what it doesn't give you and what could be open. And I see people doing it because they saw someone else doing it. They can't tell me why they're doing it other than they think, well, it gives me this advantage with my sword. And I'm like, and what's the disadvantage? None. I've got this advantage with my sword. I'm like, all right, you're not going to do that well against me, and you're not going to do that well against any competent fighter who's fought other people, and understands both the pros and the cons of goofy foot.
Mm-hmm.
And
how to use it, right?
Of a standard term. I mean, is that enough of a standard term that people know what we're talking about when we say it?
I think most people understand it, but just in case, goofy foot is essentially, and goofy foot could be right or left forward, but it's the foot that's forward with the sword arm. So,
right.
And there's
so strong side weapon forward, that kind of thing. And
yep.
It does have a lot of really neat advantages, but you really have to know the disadvantages of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, if you're a trained fighter that you understand that thing, and you see someone just standing goofy foot without understanding it, it is a very easy thing to take advantage of that offside. I mean,
mm-hmm.
It's an easy arm. It's an easy rib. Talk about when do I know when to throw an offside thumb lead? The moment I see goofy foot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to do that much more probing. It's naturally open. It does not mean it's going to connect, but it means it's naturally more, has more of an opportunity to connect.
It's an earnest threat. Even if it doesn't connect, they have to take it seriously.
Yeah, and it's in a way, it's a probe by itself, right? So you're like, okay, he has to block with something. Let me see what he's going to block with. So
to build on that, because what Tristan, or the question that was asked is, what do I see? So also from goofy foot, then the movement, it's a different set of how you wish to move if your starting point is goofy foot.
Mm-hmm.
I also see people who still have that kind of extreme old school, almost a old castle mentality of strong, your sword foot, whatever, so far in the back that it takes them, they're telegraphing all day long that they're getting ready to both move forward or throw anything. You know, to say that I believe that the better stances include a stable but feet closer to each other base. I mean, I'm a big believer in that because of just the natural advantages you have with it and the less disadvantages, if any of
Yeah,
that makes sense.
nope, I would agree. I get you. So I think the big piece is lots of people understand how to use. I mean, like Duke Felix, Lucan.
Yeah.
They tend to have a stretched out base, but they exactly know where their body and what their body can do around that. And if you also notice that they can also throw no matter where they are. And I think
Right.
Throwing in motion becomes a large thing in that place, right? And that's, I think that's not only for people doing goofy foot or sword foot forward, but it's also for anyone doing any of, there are times my sword foot is forward while I'm throwing, depending on if I'm trying to sneak a little bit more range out. The key is understanding where your body is and understanding, again, going back to your probing, understanding what your opponents can give you, your opponent's going to give you.
Yeah.
So
It's not wrong. It's just harder to
no.
do right.
Yeah. Well, and you can't do anything right if you don't understand how it works.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest piece there is if you like you said earlier, it's like, hey, that guy does it, I'm going to go do it. Well, if you're doing that in a isolated box, well, it's like reading martial arts out of a book.
Right.
In fact, it's harder than reading martial arts because at least the martial arts you can read and they kind of give you an idea. But it's now you're like, okay, I'll watch some video. You have no clue on how the hip turns. You have no clue on weight distribution of your feet. You have no clue on what they're trying to set up targets and things like that. That's why lots of people changed over to goofy foot forward, and they're very successful. And there's and I fight a lot of them. A lot of them are great fighters, and they have great students. But again, those students were taught what the strengths and what the weaknesses are.
That didn't just happen.
No, nope, not at all. So if you're gonna, I guess the big warning out there is if you're gonna make a change, make sure you understand why you're making that change, and make sure you understand the dynamics of that change. So I think that's a big part of learning.
Yeah. And I hope that you've
Something that
got
helped me a
someone to
lot
give you the feedback.
as a young and intermediate fighter is realizing that the range is dictated by the back foot. Because if your back foot is far back, even if you bring your body forward and your front foot forward, you're always going to be held by that back foot for how far you can reach. So, and I think even Brannos taught me that, where as soon as you bring that back foot in, the front of you that's facing your opponent doesn't get any closer to him, but you can certainly reach out farther now. And so that's one of the things I've coached a lot of people into. Well, like, why do I get to the point where I almost can reach my opponent, but I can't quite get there? It's like usually because it's that back foot is too far back. Just bring it up a little bit into a slightly narrower stance, because a lot of people like go into longer stances, either because they have a karate background or their body wants to spread those feet out. But as you bring them closer, you can reach out a little farther. And right. that helped me, and it helped a lot of people with getting over I'm trapped, I'm caught, I can't get to where I need to go. Again, feet are anchored and they're too far back.
So Alan, where did you get your feet from? I mean, I guess this is where we're decision-making process talk also, but I think we're also talking a little bit on training disciplines. Where did you get your footwork from?
From playing basketball.
Yeah. So when you were teaching you basketball, did they a lot of footwork drills or?
So there's definitely some, and the further you wish to go, there's more of them. But it is the footwork that you're looking for in basketball, and And I think it's more of, this is the defensive side of basketball, because you're moving forwards and backwards a lot more. You're moving, so that actually is, you're in line with your opponent. And so defensively in basketball, you're in a good stance, one that you can move 360-degree movement from, if you're doing it right. So, and Brannos, that should immediately tick off in your head. That means there's a lot of ways you can't stand. If you have to move in every direction and be ready to move in every direction, there's really only one or two ways that is actually, multi-purpose for that. So, and that's a lot like you teach with your movement. It's having your feet aren't too wide. They're just wide enough, because if you go too wide, then you're going to be in good position to receive a charge or something, but you're not in good position to actually move with your opponent. So there are some footwork drills associated with it, and they look a lot like football footwork drills. They're with the quickly moving your feet, trying to learn how to move your feet quickly rather than long, lengthy strides. Because if you learn how to move your feet quickly, then you can take advantage. If you have long, lengthy strides, you can start to take advantage of that. But if you just learn how to move with long, lengthy strides, that doesn't necessarily translate to quick. So there's a player right now, Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's hard to say his name, but he's nearly 7 foot tall, has an unbelievable stride, but was Defensive Player of the Year for his ability to get out and actually guard smaller defenders. And that comes from just the moving your feet quickly. So now he's a guy with a big stride moving quickly. And there's just a big difference between taking big steps versus taking quick steps.
So
and staying in balance.
So I guess in your probing, do you is that one of the things you watch for too? Is do you use some of that basketball stuff to see what kind of movement your opponent has?
Absolutely. Because people have a tendency to put themselves off balance during certain things. You don't have as much balance if you're fully committed to an attack, and you don't have as much balance if you're fully trying to disengage, unless you're doing those things really well and from a strong fundamental. So, looking at that in the probing kind of gives myself a mind. And I don't necessarily like to do a lot of hard pressing, but if I see that someone looks like that's going to be hard for them to deal with, I absolutely will hard press, whatever it is to win the fight. But a lot of times what I'm looking for is to see if their footwork, when they start to try to mirror me, because I'm trying to coax my opponents into mirroring me, at least what they think is mirroring me. But I'm hoping that I will detect a flaw in how they're doing it that then I can take advantage of. So they think they're mirroring me and are at, too far of a range or something, yet they were mistaken. And I'm trying to coax them into showing me all of that so that then I can take advantage of that. Because I'm sure you guys both know, I would prefer to do all of my fighting at, far C, the furthest I can be away from my opponent and still hit them. Because that's quite often further than they can hit me, just due to being tall and, have appropriately length arms to go with that. So I spend a lot of my fight probing and manipulating and learning from how they're doing things to try to get them into mirroring me and making them think that they're at a much closer C or B when they're not. They're much more in the comfortable C, longer C that I want them to be in, or that I can quickly get to that. So you'll see that a lot. I'll have my shoulders forward sometimes to simulate that I'm closer to my opponent, when in fact, when I go back into my more natural position, I'm at more of an extreme range of C, one that's way more advantageous to me. But by leaning in, they thought that I was moving into B, or I was actually closer. So they set up and plant to start fighting. And the moment that they do that, I've already shifted back. So that's not footwork, but footwork got me to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's so in boxing that it's kind of that leading head is like, come on, hit me. and you're ready just to slide back because you're leaning forward on purpose, not on accident. So you're evenly balanced and you stick your head out there. And what you find is that people want to hit you, right? I mean, you stick your shoulders out there when they think you're in range finally, what do they want to do? Even if
And they start
know
swinging.
Exactly. Even if they know you're out of range, what do they still want to do?
And what do people do when they're swinging? They don't move as much, which means they're planting to try to get a good swing.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I would agree 100%.
I want you planted.
Yeah, because then you can move any way you want.
Yep.
So,
so people can look up the basketball footwork drills. There's a lot of great ones. Steve Nash had some a few years ago that were just phenomenal, and there are a lot of it's. The more current thought with learning footwork is less about it's definitely still about how you're moving and how quickly you're moving your feet, but now they've also shifted to maintaining your balance and your core strength doing it.
And that's what we call stacking your body, right? So that your body is all stacked over that single line. Your hips and your back. You have that core is in the place to do what you want. In fact, in many times your feet can be somewhere else as long as you've got a good core. So,
and it's clearly, when I fight a lot, it's clearly the thing I know I need to continue to work on. I hurt so much through my core. I use it instinctively and from what I learned from basketball, and I'm using it, and I'm using it correctly, but I'm not supporting it during the week well enough. So, I am at the point where I have to take significant breaks during Penzic. I can't fight every day the way that I fight. So, I have to strategically say which are the days I'm going to fight. That's just to give my core a chance to recoup and be ready to go back out and do it again.
So there was a question.
Because I'm sure we all know, if your core is compromised, we have a significant higher risk of injury.
Yeah, 100%, and that goes across every sport, to tell you the truth. So there was a question out there.
Every sport.
When you move to attack, what is the absolute first thing you do with your feet? I suspect you already covered this when you're speaking about footwork, but I guess if you're looking at a scenario where you're attacking, how do you set that up, or what do you move your feet at all, or do you shift balance? Do you move the core up and back?
It's a little different for I guess trying to understand the context of what the questioner is asking for. So a more likely example for me is I'm transcending out of range into C. And I will do that. My preference is to let my opponent do that. I prefer my opponent to be out of range and then to move into my range, the range that I want them to be in. It's just, it's less energy. And I feel like I'm actually controlling it more, because if I do my movement and they do movement, it compromises what I was trying to do. But if I let them move into the range that I want them in, or trick them into that range in any way that I can, then I didn't do it. And I was set, my feet are set to actually react to either dash forward if I see something that I really can do, or to dash on the 45, step to the 45s, or just clear out altogether. If I made a mistake of stepping into range and I'm trying to get to C and they stepped into and they want something further, well, we've doubled our speed by moving at the same time. And so I prefer not to do it when I don't have to, but even when I do it, I try to be, what's the best way? I'm not tentative, but I'm cautionary with my footwork. I want to be able to change my mind and to change my direction instantaneously, or as close to instantaneously as I can. So there's I tell people all the time, and it's one of the things I think I learned from you at some point. Brannos, is that if you want to close with somebody, wait until they step to you so that you're doubling the speed of the close. So I'm conscious, I tell people always to do it. So I'm also conscious of the fact that if I'm stepping forward and they step forward, I want to be able to have stepped forward in a way that I can change my mind.
Yeah, I would agree. The good part about pulling somebody forward is they're expecting one range, and by countering with a step forward, you're actually transcending into a range that you know. So you let's say they want to get to B range, and you take that step at the same time. You know you're going into A range. They're still thinking B, which is difficult to throw shots. They're throwing a B shot, but you're already in A, throwing the shot that you want to throw, and have an escape plan already set, right? And that's
just a lot of things you can do. You have opportunities. However, we have less opportunities. One of those things. It's a core fundamental of fighting. It's a core fundamental of most sports. If you are committed to something, you have less opportunity. Because you've committed yourself to, let's say, I've committed myself to get to B. Well, if you've committed yourself to get to B, it is extremely difficult to change and do something else. So, I'm just conscious of that myself all the time. But a really good example of that, I got, my sword here. I'll try to manipulate the fight with slight movements to the 45s, and that can be forwards or back, depending upon, whatever my opponent's doing. But I want them to come into C. Well, they don't want to come into C. They want to get to B. They want to get to a closer C to them, at least to be in range. So they take a full step. So like let's say I take a half step in or a quarter step in, and then they take a full step to me. I take a half step back at the same time I put my thrusting tip in their face. And I set the range, and I can either take, if I want to get completely out, I can take a fuller step, or I can take a smaller step, but they're not able to process it because I put my thrusting tip in their face. They process it differently, and it allows them. So that's one of the ways that I get to my C range, is I let them move in closer than they think, or closer. They want to be closer than I want them. So I stop them at the range that I want. I don't know if that makes sense, but I use my thrusting tip an awful lot to set range. I use it way more to set range than I do to poke people in the face.
Yep. So basically what you're doing is, as they're transitioning into those ranges, you're kind of setting like, okay, this is about where I want him. You put that thrusting tip in their face, they tend to either slow down or stop, but it's like, really, I'm going to throw this as soon as I transition into C, where I know that even if he's throwing, it's too bad for him.
Right.
So
and no, go ahead.
So you actually, in this case, is you're creating that pull. You're changing your opponent's thought process with the thrusting tip, and then you're changing the range while he's thinking about that.
Right. So I do two things a lot of times in that situation, because I throw an awful lot of my shots as my opponent is transitioning. I'm trying to set up the fight as much as possible to make my opponent have to transition ranges, and then to change how they do that. Oftentimes people like to do it with offense, but if you can swipe at that arm as they're doing it, then it not only slows their arm down, it slows their feet down. And the same thing with the fake thrust, basically just threatening an open position. But by that same token, I get an awful lot of kills at far range. They take that step, they're trying to transition from out of range to C. And I drop that thrusting tip down at their belly as they're taking that step, and people are moving their shields as they're coming forward. And you look for any reaction. It could be that I'm just trying to hold them up, but that's one where I have a tendency to look for any kind of downward movement with sword and shield. And if they come out of their guard, whatever is guarding their onside face, then I can be right back with a Molinet, it's like a half Molinet, a fast Molinet, right back into an eye. Is it the hardest shot in the world? No. Is it an eyeball? Yes. I'll leave it to my opponent to have to figure out how they want to calibrate that. I'm not going to question that because I know it wasn't the hardest shot, but I'll hit you in the eyeball a number of times and then let you have to make that decision. And it was high reward, low risk because it was all at my range.
I think that's the big piece is high reward, low risk. I think what we'll probably find is that a lot of fighters, they think they have to do something, and then it becomes high risk, low reward, right? And that becomes one of those problems. There's another question that says, what aspects of fighting do you change or control in a fight? Example, range, timing, pressure. I kind of know what you're going to say here, but what other aspects?
Range is my gimme.
Yep.
So range is my gimme, and I think we've talked about that both in the previous discussion and already in this one. The pressure and the timing are things that I want to be aware of and only change if there's an advantage or a reason to change. I think it's more important that you're aware of them and you know what comes of them and you're prepared to deal with what comes from them than it is to say, I want everything to go my timing and I want to be the one that controls the pressure. That's a really hard thing to do. And I find it's not as important to impose your will on the fight as it is to fight a fight that you have more advantages than disadvantages. I don't have any problem with a person who can't guard their head charging me. So what? Yeah, they're controlling the pressure. They're controlling, the speed in which the fight happens, I suppose. But if I'm not worried, if I'm not particularly worried about what their transition offense is, and I see that they drop their guard all the way through, they can have those things. I'll take the headshot. So I think it's extremely important that you're really aware all the time of what range and the timing and the pressure of those things. Is it important to always be managing or controlling them? No, you only need to do that when it is disadvantageous to you and you need to.
So Tristan, here's a quick question for you, just because out of martial arts background, I think, we talk feet in martial arts a little bit. I think most of our standard disciplines talk about shorter steps. That's why we have the C step, right? It helps shorten that step and keep your feet together. But we really, if you look at a lot of martial arts, they don't really cover a lot of feet when you get down to it. There's the ingrained discipline of doing the right step or the right kata or whatever. But have you seen too many martial arts that talk just about how to manipulate feet?
They do, but they often miss when they don't have a sparring element. Like you talk with a competitive karate fighter, and they start to understand some of the intricacies of, or a boxer. But a lot of kata-based arts and stuff, they talk about they have particular steps and things like that, but they don't really know how they're applied. But there's a lot of subtlety that goes into how footwork's applied. It's not just here's how you take a step, here's a shuffle, here's a lunge, here's a pivot, here's a pendulum step. Yeah, the academic knowledge is one thing, but applying it based on what you're seeing from your opponent and what you see of that opportunity, that's a whole different game, I think. So, and this is where I wanted to add in a little bit with the drills. Something that I noticed when I start training people with footwork, when they come into the dojo, I have the advantage of they're just in comfortable clothing. The brain gets rewired when you start putting weight on it. Like you can have pretty good agile footwork because your brain knows I'm just moving my body. It's what I move all the time. I'm only wearing clothes. You put 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds worth of armor on it and your brain just goes, I don't trust my legs anymore. I don't, and it slows the feet down. And I noticed, and I wish I would have had more insight when I started training fighters when I was group night martial here, decades ago. about you put armor on somebody and their body doesn't trust moving all that extra weight around, and for good reason. You know, one good quick lunge or something when we got no armor on, would no problem. But now your body goes, I don't want to strain my back or strain my legs because I'm not used to dealing with this weight. So if you do look up ladder drills or some of the footwork drills, try them out without in normal clothing, shorts, whatnot, but also try them with some of your armor on. Maybe put just your leg harness on and then go through them and see how your body feels. You'll feel a lack of trust when you first start those drills. If you wear heavier armor, I would say don't just go lunging into it with all of your armor on. But get your brain used to maneuvering the extra weight around as well when you're doing your footwork drills. And that's something that martial artists generally don't ever do, because they get on a mat or in a dojo, they're never going to be wearing armor. But that's something unique to SCA combat that our bodies need to be conditioned to.
Yeah, if you're to learn your footwork that you're going to try to apply to, say, sword and shield, do some of it with sword and shield, because you not only will it change how your footwork goes, but you need to be conscious of how your footwork's going to change your guard.
Very much so.
And you always want to be on top of that. What is the easiest thing to do in a fight if someone has dropped their guard? It's I spend the whole fight oftentimes just waiting for someone to make a mistake with their guard. So don't be the person who makes a mistake with your guard just because you were trying to learn or do something you weren't comfortable with footwork wise.
Yeah, especially at a range that especially at a range that is dangerous. If you're gonna do that kind of thing, that those are the type of moves that you can do from a safer space to still get some feedback from your opponent.
So one of the things, guys, that I see a lot of time, I'll see these collegiums, these sort of fighting training events, and people are teaching footwork, but they're teaching tricks, and I don't think that's important. I think that's the wrong focus. I don't think that the tricks what makes footwork. I think not making mistakes is what makes good footwork. Knowing where to have your balance point, when to have your balance point, and knowing how to take the appropriate length of a stride. I think those things contribute more to what I would call good footwork than any tricks that you learn footwork, any of the stutter step stuff. So I can do some fun stutter step stuff that I learned. I do a kind of a football stutter step, especially after I've legged someone. I might come at them and then do a stutter where I lean left that allows me to make a quick 45 so I can throw the passing or the slightly better angle wrap shot. And that's fun, but no one needs to actually learn that. I'm only really doing that to kind of keep myself engaged. It's a trick that's not necessary to be in anyone else's repertoire. It doesn't need to be in mine. But people think that then is good footwork, and it's an application of having good fundamentals, but that's not what I think of when I'm criticizing or trying to improve someone's footwork. It's not to help them do tricks. It's to help them not do dumb stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Is you're trying to get them into a space that they understand where their body is, and anytime they're outside of that scenario, then they're weak. And I think what you're saying is like that you're going to lean that far over. Don't do that anymore. Watch, because once you lean that far away over, you take a tremendous amount of time to get back, or your defense degrades to this, or any of those types of things. And I think that's going back to that fundamental footwork. I think that's key. And I think the key in the fundamental footwork are a number of things. One is we have to get used to trusting our feet. And the more we work and more I've been adding more and more footwork stuff and layering it, really most of this just comes down to all these ladder drills and everything else comes down to you being agile enough with your feet to always be in good position.
Yeah.
Right.
And with good posture.
Yeah. And with good posture, with nice and stacked, nice and straight. And so you can even make a mistake, but if your feet are agile enough to compensate for it, then you're good.
Yeah.
And it's the people that can't compensate that get taken advantage of. That those are the guys that you're like, hey, come a little closer and take that giant step that you usually do, so I could hit you in the head on the way through while you're doing that. You know, that's you know, that's what you're doing when you're probing. It's like, oh, this
Right.
guy's going to take a giant step, so I'm going to make him take a giant step, and then I'm going to hit him as I'm sliding backwards.
Yeah. So yeah, that sounds perfect. That is a lot of my thought process with it. I am looking more for my opponent's bad footwork and then trusting my footwork to just not put me at any disadvantages.
Exactly, and that's, I think, you know, where you come off on the, you know, I you know, footwork isn't just jabbing here and there, and it's not doing crazy stuff with your feet. It's not hopping around. Although, you know, some people can take advantage of those things. You know,
Sure.
I do a lot of, I do a stutter foot, you know, essentially a jab foot, you know, just to drive energy up into my opponent, right? So I'll just take, you got some tension between you, you move and you give a jab right on your front foot, and you move your front foot about 2 inches and bring it right back. And it's essentially what it does is you see how much tension that puts in your opponent, and you see if you can put enough tension into them that it leaves a block weak, right?
Yeah.
Or
But I wouldn't call that a fundamental. That's
that's an
that is
advanced
something
move.
you're doing,
Mhm.
you know, and you're doing an advanced probe.
Yep.
And you've taught yourself, you put yourself in a good position to be able to do it, so that you can do it without the risk, because that exact same thing done at the wrong time is murder. It's self-murder. It's suicide.
Yeah, especially if somebody's, you know, instead of that 2-inch jab foot, or, you know, they end up taking a 6-inch or an 8-inch jab foot, or their center isn't right, so they end up shifting weight to that front foot.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think
Then,
that's perfect.
you know, because those are the types of things. If I take a 6-inch jab foot and shift my weight to the front, you're going to snap me faster than I can even imagine. Okay. And I know this because your response is that quick. Even I'll do jab foots on you, but they tend to be from a range and small enough that you have to appreciate how fast I can move. So I'll give you a jab foot to drive you off, and I'll walk in that range, and I'll get right back to that spot, and I'll give you another jab foot until there's some uncomfortableness between us. Right? Because now you don't know if I'm going to jab foot or I'm going to or actually fall through it. So, you know, that's that probing, right? I'm probing with a jab foot to see if I can, what your response is. If your response is not to move, then I have opportunity, right? If you just hunker down with your shield, you know, then you have opportunity. And I'm sure you see that quite a bit. I mean, you know, obviously there are people that are not going to follow you. If you give them enough pressure really fast, they just hunker down, right?
Right. And I didn't want that. I wanted them to come forward. I just didn't want them to come forward fast.
Right. So how do you change that on people like that?
You know, that's where you know, once you've determined that, oh, you know, like if someone has really good discipline on their transitions, and they realize that, oh, wait, he's setting me up, and they don't go for it, well, then I had to take all the information that I've currently got and add more information to it. So I might try to start probing a little differently. I might, you know, as much as I don't want to close, I might close into B. Try to be offensive to the point that I'm throwing shots at my opponent's eye, and then use my footwork to get back to C. You know, if they're not going to come at me and get to the C range that I want, I will eventually have to move into it. And if their discipline is really good, then I might have to move into it more than I really would like to. And so then I just want to I want to even the score. If I don't want to be in B, I don't want to be in B most of the time. So if I am in B, I'm trying to attack your sword arm or your sword eye, to minimize my risk at being in B range. Because there are so many unbelievable, just fantastic B range fighters that, you know, they're so good at it. So to minimize that risk, I attack the arm or I attack their eye so that I get their shield up, and then I try to transition back to where I want to be. And Again, if they've got solid transition, discipline, and they're not letting me do it the way I want, I have to force the issue.
Just a quick reminder out for everybody, throw out questions, and they don't necessarily, we'll try to stay on topic a little bit, but obviously we're kind of roaming topics a little bit, a little bit of training, a little bit of understanding how to probe. I think the most interesting thing that's coming, out of His Grace is we spent 45 minutes or more than that now, an hour and 15 minutes, I guess. And we really not even talking about throwing sword blows necessarily. All of this probing is mostly use of feet, use of pull, some pressure, right? And,
right.
You don't have to throw a blow at somebody, although it is a technique you can use, but it's a dangerous one, to essentially probe what your opponent's going to do.
Right. As we know, the shot is like the last part of the conversation. If it's done correctly and you've used everything else to get to that, then it's the last statement in the conversation. So I spend less time training how to throw shots than I do how to be in position to throw good shots, when to throw them, when not to throw them, and to make sure that you're in good position, whether it's guard or a combination of guard range, that you can deal with the oncoming attacks at you. I think there's lots of people who can teach you how to hit people. So I don't focus on that nearly as much. Oftentimes they'll be like, well, how do you throw a good onside snap? And I say, go watch Brannos's video. Come back and let's talk about it next week. You just do a better job of explaining it than I do. And so I'll try to fix it when they come, after they've watched it on video. But I don't know how many people I've told, just go watch the dang video and then come back and talk to me about it. Because
one of the things I've noticed
it's not
is
that shots are unimportant. There's just so many other people who are doing that, and there are people doing it better. And it's the natural conclusion of the fight. But I think all the other parts of the fight are as interesting, if not more interesting. Because everything else is happening in your head.
Yes, I agree. Everything is that the head is the key, right? That's the most important piece.
The shot is muscle memory. Yeah, it's kind of in your head, but it's also in your arm. Yeah. And so if you've done everything else, that's your empty mind. I've done everything I need to do. The shot is muscle memory. I'm doing it the way I trained to do it. And so now I'm just executing, but I got to hear how we got to here. The journey to throwing that shot, to me, is the beautiful part, is the dance. And I know we're infatuated with the shot. I out there on the turning field just as much as anyone else, or the pickup field, and you see a great shot and everyone goes, ooh, ah. But I think at some point in your fighting career, you're doing it right if you get to the point to where you're far more interested in how you got to that.
All right, Tristan, go ahead, shoot.
Yeah, from a coaching standpoint, training somebody with footwork, and I think the word maneuvering probably works better than just footwork, because yes, footwork is the tool that you use, but really it's the maneuvering that is what's going to win a fight. And you put it perfectly, where the shot really is the climax. It's the foreplay that is what's going to win or not. And so it doesn't feel sexy working on footwork and working on maneuvering. But what pounding on a Pell, that feels pretty butch. You get out and you start smacking away, and you hear the thing thundering away, and your sword starts going to powder, and you're like, wow, this feels really great. But really, it is that setup and how to maneuver. Sadly, you do need somebody to practice with. But this is where I think we talked a month or two ago about doing an entire show on getting people started by working with boffers, because you can practice that maneuvering and isolate just the maneuvering part, remove the power, remove the fear of pain, and just get onto how am I going to maneuver. And then they can you can start to familiarize them with the tools, which are the steps and the footwork for how to get the maneuvering they're looking for. And then the reading and the response part. So
and then you layer on. Go
It'll be a
ahead.
good episode when we get to it.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to, because then, and I do a lot of, drill footwork, and then we do a lot of tension work where you're controlling opponent. We mix them to develop something. And that is, so now you're not only working on maneuvering, but you're also using the good footwork, and then you're looking to create opportunities. So you just keep layering that training on top of each other. And, that goes right into, we do a lot of pad work with boffers. In other words, it's, and I keep saying this, but there's not a lot of people that really practice throwing while moving.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's amazing to watch. When I practice with their feet are off when they're throwing while, I'm like, okay, you're going to walk at me, and I'm going to walk backwards, and you're going to hit this pad. And their timing is off. They're awkward. They stop when they throw. There's hesitation, all of those pieces. And then now I'm going to walk at you and you're going to throw. Because that's what we're talking about. Al-Anon, if you had to set up and you hesitated and stopped when you're throwing that falling back blow, what would happen?
I would be out of position and my opponent would put me where I don't want to be.
Exactly.
And, that's what they're trying to do. And it's what I'm trying to not happen. What happened?
Right. So you had to learn. That was learned because you got used to it. And I think we could cover some of that space. And I think the episode you're talking about is going to be a good place to cover, from base to up. And that is just, we're going to walk until you're comfortable walking and throwing, and your timing of your drop foot and that throw hits at the same time every time. And there's no hesitation. There's no stopping. There's no setup. You're just going to walk and tap, walk and tap, walk and tap. Right? Now you're going to do it backwards. You're going to walk and tap. Now we're going to do it on angles. Because the more you're comfortable throwing at any given time, because how do we usually throw? We stand there, we set up, and we throw.
That is part of training for the first 40 years of our combat existence. That, have a wide, firm stance so that you can do this big transition from back to front. That's hard to do, going all the way back to all the way front while moving. But if you're able to now move and be able to throw shots from a modified A or an A frame or anything, where you're not having to do the big transition from back to front, now you have the opportunity to do that and do it well and do it in a reasonable facsimile of good guard.
Yeah, and good, power generation.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys wind up doing a program, where you're kind of approaching what you can work with from adding boffers, I highly recommend you bring in someone like Duke Sven from Monsiora, who can come from the other direction. You guys are trying to think about how you can incorporate boffer into what we do, and he came into what we do from boffer. And that everything that we've talked about, the whole how to move, when to move, how to have your balance, all of those things, I've seen most of the people who were really successful in the boffer versions of combat sport, they already had all that. And you know what they had to teach themselves how to do? How to throw a good shot. And wow, that didn't take more than a couple days.
Yeah, and I agree. They have great movement. I mean, I think we, in most cases, and I think it just comes with time, our understanding of breaking down the fight tends to be better than theirs because they're younger when they're doing that. So they're adrenaline driven, right? So
it's
you can
so
take
fast.
Yeah.
I mean, if you watch any of their high end towards the end of their big tournaments, it is so fast. I mean, I always like to go in going, man, I'd be so good at that. And then I watch how much they're moving and how much they're throwing as they move. And I'm like, I might not be as successful at that as I think I would be.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing some of the stuff they can do. So
it's things that 18 and 19-year-old people can do.
Yes, exactly. On that point, we're kind of running down on our time, but you did make a point about Sven. Tristan, don't we have a show coming up?
Yes, we do. Next week's show, I'll just pull this up here, is teaching in a dojo how to structure training effectively. And we're going to be talking about how to take people and add a little structure to their training and not just have them show up, put helmets on and gear and go after each other with sparring, but how to work as a coach with somebody and form a kind of a training plan built for them and effectively build their skills, kind of as an assessment and then training cycle. So that's going to be our episode next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, I'm hoping that people out of that will get a little bit of understanding, especially those that haven't had a martial arts background, get a little bit of understanding of that formality of martial arts and how it can transcend some, right? I think there's a balance in our organization that could be done better. I think fighting is really pushes us to a certain level, that constant sparring thing. But I think the fundamental training piece is we could do a better job. So I'm looking for that one.
And I think method for teaching is very important. Method for fighting is important. I mean, method right. for having a system, something other than just throwing stuff around and seeing what works.
So while you have the chart there, I believe Sven isn't Sven the week after or something like that?
The week one after that is it says training in remote areas.
Oh, that's right. Then Sven. Okay.
Then it's going to be conversation with Sven. Yeah.
So we definitely lined him up, Alan, and I agree with you 100%. I'm looking forward to hearing his end because he does do a lot of boffer training. It's going to be nice. We just had Luke on a few weeks ago, and they do a ton of it in their group as well, and they found it incredibly useful. So yeah, it's been very. I'm looking forward to putting a whole class on that together, maybe pulling both those guys in and let them talk a little bit about it. And I know I've been pushing it and doing it for years now. It's a great tool. So we're getting close to wrapping up. You have any last stuff to talk about there, Elena?
So mostly I just wanted to take a moment again and express my appreciation for what Coach's Corner is doing, what Lady Vesper and what Sir Rifkin and so many other people are doing, giving us an opportunity to actually still be a part of the Society for Creative Anachronism, to still engage in thinking about and being passionate about fighting. It's really important right now. It's really hard for us to actually do this the way that we all grew up doing it, which is in person. And so I'm really grateful. I mean, I think if someone could snap their fingers and make the pandemic go away, the value of what you guys are doing with Coach's Corner is still so important and so vital. And I hope that you guys continue to do it. And, even if you every so often need to take a break and recharge and then come up with some new ideas about stuff, but it is extremely important what you're doing. And I'm grateful. As so many other people are grateful. I want to make sure that you guys get all your props for it. So thank you very much.
Well, I thank you for joining us, and thank you for that good word. I know we're going to have you back because you've been a popular member already out here. So, we're dragging you in for ratings all the time. So, it's good. Plus, I get to talk to you, so that's the best part. And you're as passionate about this as I am, which is gets me all geeked up. So, Tristan, any good words?
It's always great to see Ailgheanan, my friend. We met many years ago, and we just don't get a chance to hang out enough. So this was just a treat for me, and it's a treat. Thank you again, Vesper. She does the whole thing for setup for this, and it's just makes it easy for us to come on these episodes on Friday night and do our thing. And through her efforts, we can do this much easier than we would if we had to do it all ourselves.
And I'll echo both of them, and we're lucky enough that we can still get together and talk about the things we love. We just covered Meridies and talked about you and saw a million fighting videos of you, Alan, we just did on Great Fighters of YouTube on Tuesday night, and we're doing like a whole evaluation, kingdom by kingdom, kind of everything from funny armor requirements to shots to where the fighting developed from, a calibration, all of those things. It's a little bit of a it's kind of a rolling fun group to be with, but it's been fun to watch all the videos of these great guys that I've seen fight forever. So but I want to point out that through this rough time. I mean, the society's had real society's had an incredibly rough time. Our society and many other hobby groups have really also had a very rough time because, when we're able to stand in front of each other and appreciate each other, it's one of the most important things. All the things fade away. And when you're looking at them in somebody's eyes and that excitement, it doesn't matter which side they're on. It doesn't matter if they think exactly the way you do or any of those kinds of things. It's the thing we share as a society, and we share it. We really do share it. And Vesper, you allowed not only us, but you've allowed so many people to still keep sharing the society and still keep excitement about it. And it's funny. I don't think a lot of people knew you that well when you first started the shows, and I know you worked hard. There was technical difficulties, and it was hard to get people like me to respond to you. And
I just have to say, because I called you out. And I was like you said, I mean, I was a nobody. I mean, compared to what everybody has accomplished in the SCA. And I remember commenting on a post that you had been tagged in and saying, please respond to my message. So I'm so glad you did.
Well, I would tell you, I'm a Pelican as well in the society, and I've seen a lot of great work done. And in this time of real hardship for our society, you've been a bright, shining light more than almost anybody I know. And I thank you from the deepest part of my heart.
Thank you. Well, that goes for everybody that is doing all of this work. I just show up and help out in the background, but you guys are the real talent. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm super excited for next week and all the following weeks. So everybody be sure to tune in next Friday. I'm going to post a link to the Coaches Corner so everybody can reach out to you all in the meantime. And thank you to our special guests tonight.
I know. Good
Thank
seeing you
everybody.
again.
Have a lovely week.
Thank you, ladies.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Night.